Welcome to How to Share, a podcast about sharing to the appropriate audience in the best way at the right time, and how to receive when others share. In this episode, we are with the insightful and interesting Dr. Vicki Atkinson. As a licensed therapist, as well as a former professor and dean, Vicki has made a career of receiving when others share. So she gives us some incredible tips for how to listen. She tells us how reflective listening, looping, paraphrasing, and mirroring back to the speaker can help slow things down and lead to truly understanding the emotional and cognitive point of view of the person who is speaking. Vicki fills us in on the SLANT acronym as reminders of how to be present when listening. We learn her tricks for how to stay open and curious and elicit more information in a conversation. We talk about asking for what the person sharing needs. It follows with something that my dad often said after meeting with people. Mostly, I listened. Vicki also provides some useful methods for not shouldering the burden of others, but instead being able to receive and support while maintaining the boundaries and discernment that allow people to grow. We provide some perspective for when receiving feels time-consuming, especially at work. Listening well can mitigate stress and short-circuit bigger problems. This is a great episode that provides some foundational practices for listening and receiving. Join us as we dig into slowing down, being present, and getting to the heart of sharing. Hi, Dr. Vicki.
Hello, Mary Wynne.
It's so good to see you and talk about such an important topic, how to receive. I mean, you are a licensed therapist, you've been a professor, a dean. I mean, you've made a career of receiving and listening. So I'm so excited to pick your brain.
I'm so happy to spend time with you always, and I love your new platform and what you're doing and the concept behind it. My little insider information about it is just, never was there a time when it was more important for people to learn how to share,
How to share
right?
and how to receive what others share
Yeah.
within the right realm and boundary.
Yep.
Can you teach us about how you do listening, whether it reflective listening, is there a style?
Well, I mean, for starters, I think it's one of those common denominators. It's people go, I don't need to be taught how to breathe. I don't need to be taught how to listen. But it's one of those things where the runway is very broad, it's very long, no matter
Mm-hmm.
where you are, in your life's journey. Everyone can learn how to be a better listener. It's
Yeah.
very, I think essential, but I think it's often overlooked. And you had specifically asked about this concept of reflective listening, which goes by, a few other names.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people will refer to that process from like a therapeutic point of view as looping. And sometimes it gets, lampooned a little bit, in TV and movies
Yeah.
because of the heavy focus on paraphrasing, which is really just, it's another way of what you said before, receiving a heavy dose of slowing things down, which, is a
Mm-hmm.
whole separate category that we could talk about, where
Mm-hmm.
we seem to put a premium on speed. The faster, the better. And for many things, I think that that's a bonus. In the times that we live in many ways, it's a detriment from a human relationships building point of view and communication. But I think it's that paraphrasing, slowing down, checking in with a speaker, really kind of in some ways mirroring back,
Mm-hmm.
what what would from an emotional point of view, from a cognitive point of view, let me make sure that I heard your words. And I think sometimes the problem with that is if there's an important element about tonality that that reflective paraphrasing needs to be done with a smile in your voice,
Mm-hmm.
with heart. So it doesn't just sound like an interrogative,
Mm-hmm.
poking, is this what you said?
Right.
Um, because
So,
if you want to be heard and understood, you've
mm-hmm.
got to allow for that. And for the speaker to come back and say yes or no, or let me add.
Right, right. And I would imagine from a therapeutic point of view, if you're doing what you're talking about, slowing things down, paraphrasing, looping,
Yeah.
that as people hear it said back to them, it helps them clarify their thinking as well.
Yeah. And it has to be done, with a delicate touch, because
Yeah.
what you don't want to do, we all do this, we get back on our haunches, and all of a sudden our
Mm-hmm.
shoulders are up, we're
Right.
antagonized, and sometimes our own words, when they come back to
Mm-hmm.
us, can be a little shocking,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
sometimes we want to dismiss and deny.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
So
sense to you?
it does. It makes me think of this conversation I had with Jack Canfora, our friend and playwright, and who
Mm-hmm.
is just brilliant. And he can say things in two different ways. And we were talking about offering an apology. And one of the best apologies, I gave him an example of one of the best apologies I'd ever heard, which is, my friend and her boyfriend were having an argument, and she was upset at him. And he says, "Tell me what I did so that I know never to do it again." And
Mm,
Jack laughed and he said, "Oh, I've said that before. It's like, tell me what I did so I could never do that again." And he just put this
exactly.
tone of sarcasm on it, and it sounded
Yeah.
so different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
And
and you have to watch it. And some of us can layer that on, and we are
mhm,
completely unaware.
right. I wonder as you're talking about this, and especially the slowing down part that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is it because then we aren't responding? We aren't in the position of responding with our own thoughts, but instead doing that mirroring?
Yeah, I think it's that gap that we have to allow in order to receive, because I think one of those things that happens very often, and tons of communications professionals and therapists have said this for years, and psychologists, is that often when communication falters, it's because we're not allowing the time to receive. As you're talking, my wheels are turning. I
Mm-hmm.
already think I know where you're going, and I've got a response, a retort, already planned. And as I'm doing that, I'm no longer in the moment with you. I have
Mm-hmm.
disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not present, and I'm not fully receiving what you have to share. And I think one of my favorite examples of that actually comes from an author that you and I love, David Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
A year or so ago, wrote How to Know a Person.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, I mean, there's so many things that he writes about that, we love, but one of them was it's alluring when you're having a conversation with someone and you want to add to what
Mm-hmm.
they've said. Brooks calls it's not being a one-upper, but it's a topper offer. Right? And so when I do that, you may be saying something that sparks so many things for me, and I'm excited, and I want
Mm-hmm.
to, I want to, bob and weave with you, and keep the conversation going. But as soon as I do that and I top you off, I've now taken from you. It's no longer, your
Right.
conversation with me and sharing. I have now absconded with the talking stick. It's
Right.
now about me. But I think it's a pretty pervasive problem, not allowing that to be fully expressed before commandeering the conversation.
Well, as the youngest child in a family of big talkers, I totally get that one because if you don't get your thing in, the conversation is going to go somewhere else and you will never have had the chance.
No,
I
that's
mean,
so
it
true.
comes from the
Yeah.
family of origin in a lot of spaces, I
Yeah.
would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the ways that you can combat that, if that's your tendency, that you're worried you won't get a word in
Hmm.
edgewise, is to remember kind of your manners as a listener.
Hmm.
And that in order to be a good listener, you need to be active. And I'm not really talking about active listening so much as just, be present in the conversation, and, allow the speaker to know that you are present. And,
Yeah.
my favorite simple acronym for that is SLANT. Have you heard of
Hmm.
that
I
before?
haven't.
It's my favorite. And I think the thing that's so good about it is that it applies to Zoom meetings, and in-person conversations, but it's that idea of posture. The S is for sit up. And
Mm-hmm.
so even when you and I are podcasting and talking, sometimes, I
Mm-hmm.
slouch, maybe more when it's just the two of us. But when we have a guest, I tend, my shoulders go back, I sit up. So S is for
Mm-hmm.
sit up. And L is really interesting because it's a matter of degrees. It's about leaning in.
Oh,
You do that too much, and what happens if you lean in too much?
you fall forward.
And what else?
Uh,
How do you read someone if they lean in too much?
they're too eager or too,
Yeah, it could
yeah.
be eager. It could be on that continuum of, maybe eagerness at one end, assertive, but leaning in too much
Right,
is you
right,
you are now in my space and it's
right.
aggression, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, so leaning in enough, to
Mm-hmm.
show interest,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's leaning in with the head a little bit. So S is for, sit up.
Mm-hmm.
All of our mothers would be happy, right? Good
Yeah.
posture. The L is for leaning in. The A is for asking questions. So
Mm-hmm.
if before you, and it's another way of approaching the reflective listening,
Mm-hmm.
before you carry the conversation forward and you take the football and you're gone, ask not only did I understand you said, and repeat
Mm-hmm.
back, but then to show that you were really paying attention, ask a clarifying question to
Mm-hmm.
go slightly deeper. And the classic for that is tell me more about, but it shows that you were paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then again, this can be overdone. The N is for nod,
Mm.
which is good. All the body language, the, nonverbals are really important. But have you ever had a conversation with someone where the nod felt like they were hurrying you?
Well, yes. And I've also done the where I go, yeah, 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 and I
Hmm.
and it gets irritating, and it's
Yeah.
you shouldn't do it on a podcast because it interrupts the flow all the time. But
Yeah.
I've totally
Yeah.
done that where
Yep.
I've agreed too much or participated too much.
Yeah. And I think, when I've helped students and clients in the past, because video interviews and even AI interviews that are recorded right now, it's a very common thing. But how you appear, your body language and the things that can be seen about you from the neck up become very exaggerated. So where,
Mm,
you're nodding in person, may not come across as being over eager. Everything gets amplified on screen.
right.
So. And you and I found that too about, I'll own it, all of my verbal tics and the mm-hms and the yeah and the right.
We
Yeah.
both realize you don't have to own that because we're co-owners of those. I know because I listened back to all the podcasts many
Yeah.
times and I was like, oh, there we go.
Yeah, yeah, but when we're
Yeah.
recording times three or times
Hmm.
two, and I'll say this again, even though you hate it when I say it, but your, background in engineering and your understanding of the importance of the audio, some tracks for speakers, may be stronger than others based on technology,
Hmm.
and all those little ums and ahas. If our guest is someone who may be at a lesser, volume level just
Hmm.
because of technology or the connection or their headset or speakers,
Hmm.
microphones, we really are interrupting them with things that look like they're affirming, right?
Right.
Okay, so we got S for, sit up, pay
Yep.
attention. We got L for lean in, A for ask questions, and nod, but not too much. And then can you guess what T is?
Thank you.
Like that one. I like that. Maybe we'll make an edit. This one I think people underestimate, but it's the tracking.
Mm,
So how often have we been, especially when we think we've got a little bit of invisibility in a video meeting, people are still, they've got eyes on us. So that
mhm,
tracking with the speaker and making sure, even though you want to check your email and you want to pivot to the dog or other
mhm,
things, you can do that. But if you're going to disconnect in that way and your eyes are going to peel off to something else, own it.
mhm.
Apologize, so it doesn't look like the speaker is less important than the distraction,
Right.
right?
And I can do this where somebody says, "Were you listening?" And my kids, especially. For you listening, and I can say the last 5 words, but I didn't hear them
Yeah.
because I was doing something else.
Oh,
And, one of my favorite quotes about listening is that if something's important, you need to say it 3 times, once
yeah.
for the ear and once for the heart. That as speakers, that we need to, if it's important, not assume that it comes across and is
Yeah.
understood the first time.
So important. And I sent you this image because it's something I've used a lot with clients and students for years. But the Chinese character for authentic listening
Mm-hmm.
is actually an amalgam of head plus heart. So when you think about both of those things, and head, heart, eyes, and attention. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all of those things kind of graphically represented,
Mm-hmm.
which is like such a wise
Beautiful.
thing.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I will include that with the show notes because that's beautiful. Do you have any standard phrases that you use to elicit more? I mean, you said tell me more as one. Say more, I think, is a common one as well. Is there a stance of openness or curiosity that
Yeah, I think when people realize that you're paying attention and that you have paid attention enough that you can ask a question that comes from a knowing place,
mm-hmm.
you can see a shift with someone, especially if you're in a situation where there's a level of anxiety or nervousness, an interview, a first encounter, a high stakes interaction in the workplace, where
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to bring two sometimes opposing views together to find common ground. When you can acknowledge something that the other person is bringing and however you say it, give value to it,
Mm-hmm.
and I often, because it's my word of choice, I often say, and it depends on the context, maybe I wouldn't be as free with this, but I often will tell people when they're sharing things with me and it's personal
Mm-hmm.
that I love that, or that I see that, or
Mm-hmm.
I feel that too. Um, because I think we need that connection. The person who's speaking needs to know that they've been seen, that their words were understood. So I think however people are comfortable with that. And in the workplace, it's often, and you have to own it, like I said, but the enthusiasm, and you do this so well with teams that you have led by really coming through with the enthusiasm and lifting people up to keep them moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
especially when there's a gem of something there that has the potential to really take hold,
Mm-hmm.
and the collaborative aspect, let other
Right.
people in on it, but you've got something there. So I think it's affirming.
Right. Right. That's good. I think something else occurs to me as we're talking about this. My dad, who was, a pastor for many, many years,
Hmm.
used to, after he was retired, people would often call him for advice.
Yeah.
And when he would come back, say, how did it go with so and so? Or how was your coffee? My dad didn't drink coffee, but tea with so and so. And he said, mostly I listened.
Yes.
And he knew it took me a long time to understand, but he knew that what they needed wasn't necessarily advice, but to say what they were considering
Yeah. Yeah.
and to have somebody affirm their inclination. So when you said the word affirm, it really
Yeah.
spoke to me, that affirmation, that enthusiasm, that
Mm.
nugget that they already have,
Yeah.
encouraging that to come forward.
Well, and I never had the benefit of meeting your dad, but you know how much I love, your book, Finding My Father's Faith. It's just so, 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 so good. And I'm sure your dad, in his own way, knew how to ask that question when people would bring him their burdens, their
Mm-hmm.
concerns,
Mm-hmm.
and every helper person, everyone who's a manager or a
Mm-hmm.
leader has to find their phrase, but somehow or other you have to be able to ask the question, how can I help you? Or
Mm-hmm.
what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Because there will be the people who just need the listening post and the clarity of their own voice coming through, knowing that someone is really there paying attention. That
Right.
might be all they need. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is that sometimes people who are helpers or feel like they are born problem solvers or, they're puzzlers and they know how to do stuff, will feel like they're only being approached for solutions.
Well, and you just provided a beautiful segue sort of to the last question that I had, which was how do you receive but and carry what it is, either
Mm.
not to jump in to roles. And you've written about this. I love your post, A is for ambivalence, where we play roles with people, especially our longtime friends, where they think, oh gosh, not only is Vicki going to have a solution, but she's going to do it for me. Or so how do we understand what's ours? What are our bad
Yeah.
habits within relationships that how do we get out of those if we need to have a different response than normal? And how do we carry the things that are heavy?
Yeah, when we receive them. Well, I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind, because I'm talking to you, and you're such a great mom and such an icon of parenting. My words, not yours, right? But I think you have to be careful to not assume, every task, every challenge, every conundrum, because when you do that, and I think the example with children, people can identify with this, I think, a little bit more easily. We're actually taking away growth opportunities when we
Mhm.
do that,
Right.
right? So you're
Hmm.
like cutting the knees off at like agency, right? And so I think we forget, as people mature, that if they have their go-to people that are the fixers, you begin to diminish your own capacity, that you can't do certain things on your own. And I think there's some delicate ways for people that have fallen into that trap to find their way out of it, and to offer alternatives. I'll be here. What ideas do you have? Gosh, I'm
Hmm.
not sure. But, let me bring you back to another example of triumph that I remember in your past, and you
Hmm.
often say this, we
Hmm.
do hard things. You
Hmm.
can do hard things. And I think that relates to teams and individuals, especially I think in management. And you were sweet to point out that I was, a dean of students and had a lot of people reporting under me. And there was often a lot of conflict in the work that we had to do taking care of students. And I think it's really important to be able to say to people, I value your ability to push through, that you
Hmm.
don't, I'll be here, but I,
Hmm.
I can't make the decisions for you. I will support you.
Hmm.
I will champion you.
Hmm.
But I can't do in an organization, top to bottom.
Right.
Leaders can't do all the jobs of the people that report up to them. It has to be equalized somehow. But still, you want to make sure that the people around you know that you are in their corner.
Hmm. And I love what you say there because it's such a good model for I've listened, um I've asked questions. I support that I support you thread is
Hmm.
so important to both being heard and receiving,
Yeah.
and also carrying it forward.
Hmm.
And it strikes me that one of the things that you just said too helps us carry heavy things for other people. Because if we believe that they can handle it, and if we communicate that they can handle it, it helps us remember that we don't have to carry it for them because they're going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think it's a gateway to being really clear. It's a whole other conversation we could have, but it's about really trying to mitigate stress in life, in the workplace. When you get to that place where you're being honest and authentic about roles and responsibilities, you're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from talking about work-life balance, really trying to be thoughtful about workload and really looking at like team synergy. And I don't care how big or small the team is, but that
Mm-hmm.
ability that people need to have in an environment, especially right now, to be dynamic, and kind of intuitive with one another, to know that one day I may need to do a little bit more for you, and that reciprocity, because there will be a day when you're going to need to do a little bit for me, but I'm not scorekeeping about it. We're paying attention to our needs, but being honest about them so that it doesn't come across as, game playing or some of the nastier stuff that can come up,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
But you have to be able to be honest about a lot of those things.
right. that authenticity. I mean, I think that comes through in, every conversation that I've had about how to share is
Yeah.
authenticity. I mean, I think unless we can be real, when we can be real, we have something solid to fall back on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a difficult time right now for people because in my career I have never seen more people in self-protect mode. It's really hard to know, especially in the hybrid work world where people don't see each other as often. There's a lot of suspicion around who's in the office, who's just, badging their way in,
Right.
and leaving. So I think it is much harder. But then the flip side to that is it also puts a really fine point on how important it is to spend the time doing the things that
Mhm.
you're working on to really build the skills. And
Mhm.
it's equal opportunity for everyone.
Mhm.
We can all grow.
Oh, I love that. We can all grow. That's got to be a tagline for this episode and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I,
Yeah.
I think it's really important, and yeah, and
Mhm.
people are watching us. People that we don't think are paying attention are looking at each of us to be examples of the good right now
Mhm.
because there's a heaviness in the world. There will always be. But I think when we find examples of people that are persevering and taking the time to help others,
Right.
and I don't know how you help any better than really paying attention and listening.
Yeah, and I think, and I've written about this before, where we think we don't have time to share or to receive when other people share. But what I've learned over the years is that when we take the time to do it, it keeps
Yeah.
it from getting being something bigger. Because, and I see this all the time with my kids. They're small bids for attention. If I
Yeah.
ignore them, become
Mm.
huge bids for attention that are far more hard, they're far harder to solve. So
Right.
for anybody that thinks that they don't have time, which is, let's call it all of us,
Yeah.
it really does work to do it on a consistent basis, to have good boundaries and know when you
Hmm.
need to shut your door and not receive, but also to
Hmm.
be open enough that you have that going on so you can take care of small things before they become big things.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important insight because a lot of things in life become the runaway train. And it's,
Hmm.
you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Let's
Right.
throw it all out, right? All these like goofy metaphors and mixed up analogies, right? But
Right.
some things, when they happen, they're part of your experience. And then the guilt that we carry around,
Mm.
for having been less than, than what we know we can be is also, I see that as a real hardship for people.
Say more about that. The guilt because you didn't keep the train from running away.
Because you didn't do what you could in the moment,
Uh,
the better version of yourself to do what
hmm.
you're describing. That the if only questions, if
Hmm.
only I had slowed down, if I had been a little less egocentric, a little less self-centered, if I had
Mm-hmm.
given a little more when I had that gnawing sense that the need was there. It's exactly
Right.
what you just described. But I think,
Right.
across a lifetime, people carry those
Yeah.
a little bit of regret, about
Hmm.
not having had hard conversations.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I think the great thing about sharing and receiving is that we do it all the time. So we have the chance to do it better. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your
oh
incredible experience and wisdom and background with us so that we know how to receive better.
gosh, always happy to talk to you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm writing that one down because I have lots of things to talk to you about.
You just hit the button. I'll be right there. Yep.
Appreciate you.
Right back.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Canfora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, AVITIVA.com.